How's it going?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good.
What are we digging into?
I want to talk about all of the fitness tech, fitness wearables. It's all people want to talk about in my office.
All the data and tracking that's now available to the everyday person.
Yes, and like, are these worth it? Like, what are we using them for? Are they being misused? Do we not need all of this stuff? What is the
At
deal?
what point is it just data for the sake of data?
Yes.
I love
And
that.
we're two nutrition nerds. Like, we love data,
Big data nerd.
but it's just like, where does that have a place in our life?
Cool.
Sort of.
That sounds good to me. So we want to dig into. Obviously, we got to talk about the Whoop gang because
Of
I'm a
course.
Whoop user. We have the Oura
Uh-huh.
ring, so we can dig into Oura, and we definitely got to talk CGMs, continuous
Totally.
glucose monitors. Those things are become. I think there's like 12 companies now that you can buy them through. They're still pretty expensive, so they're not like, I wouldn't call them their general market yet, just because they're so price inhibited.
Hmm.
But they're definitely getting a lot more common in like the ultra world and the endurance world, and then you're starting to get some people in the fitness world. And
Hmm.
then it's never a bad time to talk tracking, like just nutrition tracking, not only because we have all these new scanning features and AI and
Yeah,
all these other things, but just to say that tracking is a unique relationship, and your relationship with it says a lot about what you should do with it.
totally, totally. And of course, I want to say my piece on some of these fitness trackers, especially some of the calorie tracking apps, because they're a hot button topic. People have strong opinions, even within like the dietitian community. People have big varying differences of opinion there.
Yeah,
And I think we should also say that we're not like sponsored by any of these companies by any
that is
means.
correct.
So I think that's important to know. And also, we're not like promoting or bashing any of them. We're just two dietitians who see these used. We've tried a lot of them, and so we're just kind of giving our like balanced opinion on them.
Yeah, I love
So
that. Giving the overarching feedback like we
yeah.
tend to do to help people make sure or assess, is this right for me? And then I know for me personally, my big thing is, if you're going to use it, you need to understand what it's telling you. Because I
Hmm.
think that's what I've noticed as sort of like
Exactly.
most acutely, is as this data and technology becomes more available, it becomes more discussed, but that doesn't mean that people have a better understanding of it.
Yeah.
And that can be super dangerous. You
Hmm.
can get people that start to obsess about the wrong thing, right? It's kind of like that idea in psychology. An eating disorder requires what's called cognitive behavior therapy, which is basically separating yourself from an ideal that is incorrect, an idea that causes a behavior, right? So in eating disorders, it might be dietary fat makes you fat. Therefore, I'm going to restrict dietary fat because I'm
Hmm.
afraid to get fat. That's a
Yes.
simple example. And so that ideal is the trigger to the behaviors that are inappropriate.
Hmm.
And if the ideal is wrong, like in the case of dietary fat makes you fat, it leads to incorrect behaviors and actually becomes an illness. Same thing with these trackers, right? If you don't understand what proper blood glucose ranges are for a fit, active person,
Totally.
then you're going to start, you risk comparing yourself to data that's not true. I think that I noticed that first in blood pressure tracking,
Yeah.
right? Because that was kind of one of the first things that people could track at home, or scale tracking. And I think it might be worth us just going through those two first, and then
Yeah.
we can
Totally.
go into the
Let's
deeper
start with the scale because I
weeds.
feel like that was like one of those first tools that like people started to have in their homes, and then they were tracking their weight over time, and then kind of snowballed into a whole different thing. So let's start with those, and then yeah, I'll let you
We'll,
take it
we'll
from
dig
there.
in. Okay, sounds good. So yeah, with the scale, right, a fun thing to think about is, as you said, it was the first thing that people could bring in their homes. It allowed them to track progress. But what are they tracking progress of? And the answer is fat loss.
Hmm.
But most people are weighing themselves, which is weight loss. Weight loss isn't just fat loss. Weight
Wait, weight
loss
loss
is
and fat loss aren't the same thing?
what?
We could talk about that for a whole episode, but
That is, to be fair, I have an episode in season 1 called Weight Loss versus Fat Loss, where we kind of differentiate those a little
shout
bit.
out
So
season one.
shout out to season 1 back in the OG days. But yes, weight loss and fat loss, for those listening, it's not the same, right?
Hmm.
Weight loss is going to be a loss of water, which we are like 65% water roughly as humans. And so if you dehydrate yourself, not drink enough fluid, you're going to lose water weight. If you really hydrate yourself, you may weigh more because you have more water. If you're inflamed because of muscle tearing after a long run or from hard exercise, or you roll your ankle and it gets swollen, well, that's water retention. And so water can flux up and down. Carb stores, known as glycogen, are in the liver and in the muscles. And those are our, I always like to say, those are kind of like our refrigerator energy stores, right? You just open the fridge and they're quick grab. Fat stores are the freezer, carb stores are the fridge, and then our blood sugar is kind of our pantries, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so with that refrigerator stuff, like that fluctuates up and down based on where you're at in your day, which
Mm-hmm.
is why most people gain weight, not just from intestinal volume, but from glycogen storage throughout the day. And
Yeah.
then you have muscle tissue up and down. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you have someone who starves themselves, they're going to lose more weight, but they probably won't lose more fat to a certain degree, right? They'll lose muscle, they'll lose glycogen, they'll lose water. And if anything, they'll force their metabolism to start to like kind of like
Conserve some energy.
conserve, thank you, that's the word that was escaping me, conserve itself so that it can keep the person alive longer.
Yeah.
And so you have these people that start to weigh themselves and they're trying to track fat loss, but they're calling it weight.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a result, the scale goes up and down. Most people have a 3 to 5 pound weight range that if they ate the same, slept the same, sipped the same, worked out the same every day, they'd still see a 3 to 5 pound fluctuation over the course of a week. And that has nothing to do with fat loss. And so I always tell people, like, if you're at a pound a week, right, a 500 calorie deficit per day, that's 0.14 pounds a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so the scale is going to go down per day 0.14 pounds of fat, but you're going to see a 3 to 5 pound water fluctuation.
Totally.
Which means the scale is likely to go up instead of down some days. And if you have people that look at the scale and when it goes down, they feel successful, and when it goes up, they feel unsuccessful, they're obsessed with the weight loss, as opposed to recognizing that weight is just a kind of bumpy slide on its way down as a lag time indicator.
Totally.
And what you want to look at is a pound a week means there's 4 pounds of fat in a month. And that means that that weight range might have changed. So you might go from 202 to 207 to 197 to 202, which means your old high is now your old low is now your new high, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so that's an example of when people don't understand what weight is, they start to put unnecessary meaning into it, right? That idea of they weigh themselves the next day because they had a pasta dinner and they're up 3 pounds on the scale and they go, oh my God, I gained 3 pounds. And it's like, yes, of water and glycogen. You did, yeah. Technically you did. You gained 3 pounds, but not 3 pounds of fat. Yeah. You gained 3 pounds of water and glycogen and probably digestive contents. Totally. And that's going to go away just as fast as it comes back. But then you have people that'll say, oh, well, like I can't eat today because I'm going to keep gaining. And so you can start to hear where these disordered behaviors can happen.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it does get so confusing. Mm-hmm. And where I see a lot of my clients run into trouble when it comes to using the scale solely as their metric of success is that it's not always going to paint an accurate picture. And so that doesn't mean that we necessarily throw it out altogether. Sometimes we do. If it's really just like we don't have a great relationship with that scale. But if we are able to have a healthy relationship with that scale and it is in congruence with some of the goals that we're trying to achieve, we can use it as a metric of success if the scale is moving in the direction that we're wanting it to. But we've got to look at it on a longer time horizon to get accurate data. So like the way I've like talked to my clients about it is if you're going to weigh yourself, let's talk about frequency. Let's make sure we're doing it at the same time of week, the same time,
that
day.
Consistency focus.
And let's not actually even assess that data more often than every 30 days.
Exactly.
We might be collecting that data more often, but we're not actually assessing that data as frequently. And so
the daily data doesn't tell us. I always like to tell them it's a scatter plot. Even in the best case scenario, it's going to look like it's all over the place. Totally. And that's where, like you said, 30 days out, you can definitely draw a best fit line to see, is that fit line going the direction you want it to be going? And that's true for people that are trying to weight restore, because obviously we shouldn't just say for weight loss. This is for people that are trying to gain weight, right? You have a disordered eating client that's trying to re-nourish their body and get back to a place that's safe and healthy for them. Same thing, if they weigh themselves regularly, it's going to bounce up and down based on digestive contents and sleep and stress and water and salt and metabolic status with hypermetabolism to consider. And so same thing, we need to scatter plot data with best fit line. And that's just such a perfect example of data without the context can be very dangerous.
Yeah, dangerous.
And the scale is like probably the most common example, but as we get more data, it gets more complex, which gives it a chance to be more dangerous. And I can't wait till we get into the CGMs for that one.
Yes.
The blood pressure one's a kind of an interesting one though. And it's something that I've actually wanted to scream from the rooftops, because people don't realize that we've done a good job with general education enough that people are starting to like latch on to key metrics, right? And
Yeah.
blood pressure, for example, a lot of people are going to know 120 over 80.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We've done enough public education that most people are going to go, oh yeah, normal blood pressure is 120 over 80. And
Mm-hmm.
then you'll have a nurse that's like, it's actually under 120 over under 80. And it's like, yes, thank you for being pedantic. But it's to say those numbers are sticking in people's heads.
Yeah.
But here's what's interesting. That's a resting blood pressure
Mm-hmm.
or a relaxed blood pressure, right?
Yeah. And how many people are like running into their doctor's office because they're late, and then they're getting out there and they're like
All
breaking
over the
sweat,
place.
and then they sit
Yep.
down, and then their blood pressure is high, and also they're nervous. We've
all
heard
those
things
things
like white coat syndrome.
That's not relaxed, and
Yeah.
so you end up getting a non-relaxed blood pressure.
They had a coffee in their hand.
Exactly. And so you have these people that'll take their blood pressure and they see these high numbers and they're not considering all the factors because they don't understand that. They just think it's supposed to be 120 over 80. And it's like, well, no, your blood pressure is changing every second.
Totally.
Right? Like when you are relaxed, it should be under those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But just to give it, I always like to give this as an extreme example. When you're on one of your long runs and you're middle of the run, your blood pressure is probably somewhere around 250 over 150.
Wow.
And that is normal blood pressure for being at like in an exerted state,
mm-hmm.
right? When we exercise intensely, our blood pressure will peak out 250, 280, 300. And that is a normal thing, but that is not normal if it's rested, right? If that was you at a relaxed state, you're going to go into cardiac arrest pretty quickly. But if that is your muscle being challenged, your heart muscle, that is,
mm-hmm.
those are your arteries working their most intensely. That's actually how you challenge it. And so that's a way to think about it. Is it's like sometimes in an attempt to establish general education, we give people one side of the anchor, but not the other side, right? So
and that's kind of on us. And like, that's why we're doing this.
Right? Yes. And that's where, honestly, it's really hard to, even the 3 minutes it took me to explain that, that's not the attention span of community education. Community education is under 120 over under 80, have a good day. And that sticks in people's heads. But then from there, you get people that are freaking out when their blood pressure is 140 over 80. And it's like, well, did you sit down and rest for 5 minutes before you actually took the blood pressure? No, I just sat down and took it. And it's like, well, your top number, which is the number when your heart contracts, was higher because your heart was contracting harder than it would at rest. And then the bottom number, which is when it's at rest, comes down first, but it just hadn't come down yet. So you needed to wait 5 minutes and it likely would have gone down.
Mm-hmm.
But you get people that'll see their blood pressure at 140 over 90 and they have a panic attack because they think they have hypertension. And it's like, well, you might, assuming you were relaxed and that's a consistent thing.
Yeah.
But all of us are going to have 140 over 90, just like walking from the car to your desk. And that's a very, very normal thing. And we can see that again, the scale and the blood pressure cuffs, those are the ones that I think kind of started it, but then we can see where that drifts into these others.
I think that like leads us really nicely into some of these continuous glucose monitors because it's the same type of misconception. So continuous glucose monitors or CGMs. Tell us a little bit about how that might kind of compare to the blood pressure situation.
I love it. So going back to how blood pressure, we're looking for a rested or relaxed blood pressure. The number that a lot of people know now is what their fasted blood sugar is supposed to be, right? Most people know that a fasted blood sugar under 100 is considered good. Many may know that a pre-diabetic blood sugar that's fasted, notice I'm emphasizing the word fasted, is 110 to 126. And then 126 and above is considered diabetic. And so we have these ranges for a fasted blood sugar. First thing in the morning, what is your blood sugar doing? And people are getting these CGMs and they don't understand that 90, as an example, is your morning fasted blood sugar. They think it's a normal blood sugar. So then they start eating foods and their blood sugar goes to 130, 140, 150, all of which, by the way, completely normal things, but they think their blood sugar is supposed to be 90. And there's either the conception that it's not ever supposed to change, or the farther from 90, the worse off it is. And so you get people that start eliminating foods that raise their blood sugar and become obsessed with managing their blood sugar in a range that is not actually to their advantage and to their benefit. That's that cognitive behavior therapy need of like the ideal of I'm supposed to have a blood sugar of 90. It drives the behaviors to control your blood sugar to always be 90, which is going to set you up to eat very, very poorly.
Yeah, totally. The way I explain it to a lot of my clients is like your blood sugar should look more of like a gentle wave. If we're eating refined carbohydrates on an empty stomach, especially, we're going to see huge spikes and huge crashes and kind of like that, like almost looks like a heart monitor, right?
Yeah.
You don't want that. But tell us a little bit about like what is a continuous glucose monitor and what does it mean to be fasted?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have fasted is no intake, right? And so fasted is typically going to be a minimum 8 hours, but ideally 10 to 12 hours. And so if you were going to take your blood sugar first thing in the morning at 7 a.m., ideally you haven't had anything since like 9 p.m. the night before. You can have water. I should note that. And so that's going to show us your blood sugar before food comes in. And the reason that that's what we look at is because food spikes your blood sugar. And so we're basically, the fasted blood glucose data is meant to show us what your body is doing without the presence of sugar. In diabetics, there's a concept in all of us where at 3 a.m., most of us reach our lowest blood sugar for the night. And that's your body burning off its energy reserves, those glycogen stores that when people are scale obsessed, they deplete and then they get ravenous and then they wake up hungry and then they go to bed hungry. But it's those carb stores get depleted while we sleep at night. And usually at 3 a.m., they're at their bottom. And that actually triggers the next part of our circadian rhythm where they start to gradually rise from 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. They should rise to somewhere in the 80 to 100 range, right? And in a diabetic, they often will rise way too high. So your body will start to make too much sugar. And so part of the dysfunction is the body overreacting to sugar. The reason is because the cells are insulin resistant. So the sugar is coming into the bloodstream, but then it's not making it into the cells. So the cells keep saying, where's my sugar? Where's my sugar? Where's my sugar? The body keeps making it and making it and making it and making it, and it just keeps accumulating in the blood. So the cells are asking for something and the diabetes is inhibiting them from receiving it. And so we want to look at fasted data because it may trigger or tip us off that there's some insulin resistance happening or insulin absence. A type 2 diabetic is the insulin isn't working. It's there, but it's not picking up the passengers that are blood sugar. A type 1 diabetic is that the pancreas, which is the insulin factory, shut down and there's no insulin anyway. Either way, sugar is going to get stuck in the bloodstream and not get to the cells. Your brain uses 100 to 130 grams of sugar a day. Your essential organs all use glucose. And so if they can't get fed, they can't function properly, which is what that feeling is. And so we're always looking at fasted because it's one of the ways to tip us off that your body might not be getting nourished appropriately.
That's a great way of putting it. So with these continuous glucose monitors, we've seen them used for diabetics, type 1 diabetics first, and then type 2 diabetics. But now we're seeing them more in the fitness industry. So could you explain, like, why would someone who doesn't have diabetes be using a continuous glucose monitor?
Yeah, and I think it all is sort of, it's funny when you think about it, it's kind of like the extrapolation or almost the evolution that came from some of the awareness. Like when we think about public health efforts, right? The glycemic index is a good example of something that we originally were giving to diabetics. And then because we live in a society that has an obesity epidemic and has rampant and uncontrolled diabetes, glycemic index became more and more common for people to pay attention to. And the glycemic index, for those of you that don't know, is basically just a measurement of how quickly the carbohydrates in a food spike basically make it to your bloodstream and spike your bloodstream. So you have these people that initially became very interested in low glycemic foods because it's, the higher the blood sugar spike, the more likely there is to be storage, for example. And so if we're looking at weight gain, it's going to be there's too much food coming in or too much sugar coming in all at once. The body has more than it needs, so then it starts to store it. And if there's excess carbohydrates and excess fats, the body will store the carbs as glycogen and store the fats as fat. And then once glycogen stores are maxed out, it'll start to store some of the carbs as fats as well. So it's now, side note, this is completely ignoring that as a US, the bigger issue is that we eat way more calories than we need as a base.
So it's not necessarily we're consuming too many carbs or, that the carbs are getting stored as fat because of insulin.
We're consuming just too much energy, right? And so that's a big piece. But people started to use glycemic index as a way to try and control carbohydrates. And that is kind of whispered down the lane to now CGMs let you see your own glycemic response, if you will.
Because it is highly individualized.
It is. Those numbers are varied across people. But then obviously one of the biggest things, one of my big criticisms of the glycemic index is when do you eat those foods alone?
Right. We're not eating these single ingredients in a vacuum most of the time.
Exactly. And so glycemic index is always tricky because it's like, yeah, I guess rice has that glycemic index, but how often do you just sit and eat a bowl of plain steamed rice? Like once you put a fat in it, it slows it down. Once you add a protein, it slows it down. Once you add a fiber to it, it slows it down. And so glycemic index did a poor job of helping people understand how their meals affect them.
Mm-hmm.
And the CGM that's where a lot of the ads come from that are trying to target less of the diabetics and more of the gen pop, is like, see how your meals affect you, which to your point does have an individualized response. And you can see what the peaks and the valleys look like. You can see what your body does. But comment is, if you're going to see that, you better understand what it's supposed to be doing or what the standard deviations of normal are.
Yeah.
And if you think that your blood sugar is supposed to just constantly be 90, you're in for a rude awakening. And I've seen this across diabetics all the way down to our gen pop people that are just trying to be healthier, all the way over to our ultra marathoners, where they start to overly constrict their expectations. And one of the things I'll say right out of the gates is, like, a normal healthy hemoglobin A1C, which is our sort of 3 or 4 month indicator of blood sugar, averages our blood sugar around 110. And so that means your average blood sugar is 110. Your fasted should be 90, but that means that you're going to spend equal times at 90 and 130 to end up at 110. And then you see ranges like 70 to 140, and that really becomes more of, as you said, the gentle wave. It is completely normal after a large meal for your blood sugar to touch 180. That said, how long is it there? If you're insulin resistant, it gets stuck there. And because it's in your bloodstream and your cells are hungry, they start saying, bring me food, bring me food, bring me food. And your body feels like it's starving because it's not getting the energy. All your energy stuck on the highway that is the bloodstream. So then the body starts to make sugar and then it adds to it. And that's diabetes, right? As you eat a meal, your body doesn't even get the meal. So the 180 from the meal plus the 50 from your body trying to, all of a sudden you've got a traffic jam on the highway, aka a high blood sugar. But for a typical healthy person, if you're going to have a large meal, you may see your blood sugar touch a 180 and then work its way down through meal pairing, high protein eating, high fats, high fibers. You're causing your meal to basically take about 3 hours to empty into the stomach. And so that means that whatever you did eat is going to enter the bloodstream over 3 to 4 hours, which means instead of a big spike and a crash, you might end up seeing just like a small, gentle wave, as you said. And so it's almost just getting people to understand what the normal variance is. The other thing I'll note, it's kind of a funny one, the amount of people that use these CGMs and then the first week they get woken up in the middle of the night because their blood sugar goes under 70, because most of these are meant for diabetics. And again, an insulin dependent diabetic has insulin in their bloodstream all the time from a pump. And that means there needs to be carbohydrates all the time because it could kill them. The insulin being there constantly will keep pulling sugar out of the body unequivocally. Our natural body doesn't do that. Our natural body will stop its insulin. But if you're injecting exogenous insulin and you have a low blood sugar, your blood sugar is not going to correct itself. But for most of us at 3 a.m., our blood sugar is going to get to around 50. Most people, it gets 50, 55, and then the body corrects it because it doesn't have the insulin forcing it down. So you get these people that get these CGMs that are programmed for type 1s to alert them, because alerting a type 1 at a 70 that your blood sugar is crashing gives them enough time to get carbs. It gives them kind of a, hey, you got 30 minutes is kind of the thing. But our bodies naturally go to 50 and aren't going to go to 10 or 20 or 30 because there's no exogenous insulin forcing it. And so those settings go to these people and then they panic. You get an email from them like, I've been getting woken up in the middle of the night with a blood sugar of 55. I don't know what's happening. And it's like, your circadian rhythm's happening. You're happening.
You're live.
All normal things. And so it is. That's the kind of stuff where our original understanding of, oh, my blood sugar is supposed to be 90, it just completely misses all of these little nuances that are, hey, this is how your body actually works. This is how your food responds. It doesn't make me hate CGMs though, because I do love to see what happens when someone has oatmeal in the morning and then has oatmeal with blueberries and then has oatmeal with blueberries and walnuts and then has oatmeal with blueberries, walnuts, and chunks of chicken sausage stirred into it. Just as an example.
Why chicken sausage though?
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I promise.
You lost me right there.
I know. Easy, they're vegetarian. But it's to say that adding a protein, right? Maybe that was not your favorite example. Side note, what I just said, super bomb. So should absolutely be eaten by
Good
those
try
out there listening. Maybe you need some tofurkey or whatever you people are into. But it's to say that it's cool to watch how your blood sugar responds in all of those cases. Because a lot of times it's going to be a very different, you're going to see just the oatmeal where it's going to go up as like a hill, not like as a crazy spike because it's super fibrous.
Yeah.
You add the blueberries, it's going to go up a little faster and a little higher. You add the nuts, it's going to level it a bit. You add the protein source, it's going to level it a bit more, and you're going to see a very different response. But then we go, okay, well, why is that useful? It's like, well, blood sugar is energy being delivered to the cells.
Yep.
Right? Your blood's a giant superhighway. It's delivering the sugar to your brain to think, your muscles to contract, your liver to function and do everything it does, and all your other organs. Your immune system runs on carbohydrates, right? And so if we can basically have an appropriate gentle wave, as you said, that's going to make you feel more satisfied. It's going to make you feel more energized. It's going to make you feel more stable. So you're going to have a nice steady energy. And that's, people will see like after a huge meal, like they don't eat all day and then they have a huge dinner and their blood sugar goes through the roof and then they feel super lethargic. It does help you see some of the extremes. And I do, when I think about someone who's used it for 6 to 12 months, they've gradually gone from extremes to decreased volatility, which is the goal. But we don't want to go from, it's funny, it goes back to, you don't want to go from completely oblivious to overly rigid, right?
Yeah.
We want to have there needs to be a range. And for most people, that range is going to be during the daytime, seeing nothing below a 70 and not being over 140 for any prolonged period of time, more than like for a couple minutes in the hour or two after a bigger meal. And people may find that the big meals that cause them to go to 180 maybe make them sleepy. And so you end up finding it's like, no, I feel better when I'm like between 70 and 140. And it's like, cool, let's fuel you to do so. But understanding we don't need to be at 90 all the time. That's an important kind of takeaway.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is it can be a really useful awareness tool, provided that you, similar to blood pressure, understand the context around it, where it should be at certain points in the day, and how we can manipulate our food and our food choices to establish a healthier blood sugar flow over the course of the day.
Yeah, and I'd say it's also, if you can hear maybe the attitude of it, where if you have someone that goes in and it's the point of the CGM is control for them. And so anything that seems volatile is triggering them, just like the scale, right? The scale is volatile. And so if you're going into control and you expect the scale to always go down every time, you're going to be massively triggered by it because it's going against, it's not aligned with your desire for control. Same thing with a CGM. If you're going in and you're trying to hyper control your blood sugars, that's the wrong. If you're going in to show curiosity,
and learn,
if you're going to excavate and better understand, and it's going back to the sample I did, where it's like, the goal isn't go in, eat oatmeal, see it spikes you to 140 and say never eating oatmeal again. If your CGM is causing you to abandon foods upon intake, pause. Right? Yeah. It's, oh, wow, oatmeal did that. I wonder what happens when I add more, if I add fruit. I wonder what happens when I add nuts. I wonder what happens when I add protein to it.
Yes.
That's where you get curious about it, explore the body. Most tools, if you use them with curiosity, are very neutral, right? I weigh 8 pounds more at night than I do in the morning. Yeah. I find that to be very curious. Well, why is it? Well, I drink like 150 ounces of fluid a day. I eat a significant amount of food with a lot of volume. And so like my intestines are full at night versus morning. Yeah. I have certain regularity. Like there's things about my body that ebb and flow makes sense. I find that interesting, not triggering. Yeah. And so it's most tools, and even the next ones we're going to go through, it's going to be the same thing. Like, what is your relationship with the data? Is it coming from a place of control and micromanagement, or is it coming from a place of curiosity, trial and error? And what I'll say out loud as sort of a plug is, hey, trialing and erroring and learning, an RD is a really helpful resource. Like, that's what's fun, is I get to be the person, you get to be the person that's like, yeah, of course it spiked. You just had pure carbohydrates. Where was the protein and fat? Add a protein and fat, and then let's see what happens. And it's, oh, wow, that felt so much better. And it's, well, or it's, that looks so much better. It's like, well, how did it feel? That's the other thing, is some people benefit from objectivity to help learn subjectivity. Yeah, right. Totally. If they see a big spike and a crash, you can ask them, okay, well, how'd that feel? And it's like, well, I felt really sluggish and then I felt really dizzy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, well, that's what that looked like. Okay, well, then let's try this. And then they see an arc, and it's like, I felt really steady and really stable and energized. And so sometimes the objective data helps us translate our subjective, which can, in the long term, can actually make you more intuitive, which is kind of cool. Sometimes you need to use these tools.
Yeah.
If you've never been intuitive, if you've never learned your body's intuition, it's sometimes some people are more literal and need that subjectivity training. And I think tools like this, when used with good understanding, good context, the right ideals, the right framings and anchors, and then alongside someone like us, a health guide, a Sherpa that's meant to help you look at the right things,
Yes.
I think it can be really valuable.
Absolutely. It's like kind of like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. These tools themselves aren't bad or obsessive or neurotic in principle. It's more of like in context.
Yeah. What meaning are you giving?
Yeah. Are you attaching too much meaning? It's similar to like a meal plan, right? Like if I give a client a meal plan and they come in a few weeks later, like, Devon, I followed your entire meal plan to a T. And I'm like, okay, but like, how did it feel? And they're like, oh, I wasn't thinking about that.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
All right, well, like the whole point of that was to like test and like see how the style of eating felt for you. How's your digestion? How was your energy levels? Like, how easy was this to put together? How challenging was it? Like, I want to hear some of like the successes and barriers so that we can actually like iterate upon your current eating style so that this becomes a learning tool for us rather than a prescription that you should follow to a T.
I love that. A tool that drives conversations.
Totally.
We talk about this. Like, we don't provide meal plans as a service. We provide nutrition counseling as a service, and meal plans are one of a Rolodex of resources we may use to help someone better understand things. Because, like, so many people have never eaten in a patterned way, and so they sometimes need a reference. But like you said, if our prescription was here's a meal plan, have a nice day, it would be a terrible business, right? Because that would fail basically 95% of the time, except for that small group of upholders that are just like religious about something like that. And even that's kind of failing because they're probably missing out on things.
On life.
But if we're using it like you just said, you use a meal plan to drive conversations, and then you're asking them questions to help reveal things, you're shaking up their perspective by using a tool. And all of these, that's what they're meant to be if they're used properly. And we see a lot of people that aren't using them properly, and it's because they don't know what the baseline is in the first place.
Yeah. Well, with that, I want to hear a little bit about your experience because you just got the Whoop watch not too long ago.
I did. This was a Christmas present, little Whoop action. So I've been a part of the Whoop gang.
I know nothing about it, by the way. So like, pretend like I know nothing.
Cool.
I do.
No, that's good to know. So the Whoop it's really more of a performance strap, and so it focuses on performance metrics. One of the things I like about it is it calculates your day strain, which your strain can be from stress, and stress can be mental and physical and emotional. And so it calculates the strain for the day, and then it calculates all your recovery, which is like how your sleep is and what your stress score is over the course of the day. And it basically can give you guidance on like when you need a rest day or an off day, when your body is showing signs of fatigue. And it tracks a couple of things like your heart rate variability, which is basically like the variance in the time between beats of your heart. That can be a sign of stress or strain or wear and tear. In addition to heart rate variability, it also tracks your resting heart rate. If your resting heart rate starts climbing, that can be a sign that your body's stressed and strained or behind. So it kind of helps you see like, am I pushing my body 1% past its comfort zone, which is optimal training, right? You should push your body past its abilities, but only slightly. And not most of us, there's kind of two camps of people that massively under challenge themselves, and then people that massively over challenge themselves. I've always been
Which
the
one
over.
are you?
Yeah.
I
wonder, right? I've always been the over exerciser. My relationship with exercise it was born out of, it was the safe place I found in elementary and middle school. And then in high school, it was largely my identity, and same in college. And so my relationship with exercise has always been much deeper than just exercise. It's always been an outlet. It's been a sanctuary for me. You were probably around in my 20s when I used to joke that I was always one run shy of a panic attack. Like if I didn't exercise, if I missed a workout, I was just going to be a mental basket case. I used runs to kind of like keep my brain at bay during my crazy overworked chapter of my career. And so exercise for me has always been something I do too much of. And this has been another part of my balance, these last few years, as I've worked on my work-life balance, worked on a lot of things in self. One of the things I did is I started working with a trainer, and we really stepped my programming back, fixed my mobility, did all those things, which we interviewed Sam and Lane last year in the podcast and talked about cannons and canoes, which was a good episode. But since then, this has been just another addition to that. It's let me kind of see how my new program is. The thing that I found most interesting was I got sick a couple of weeks ago for the first time in really a couple of years. But what was funny was when I woke up, I was feeling a little weird the night before, fell asleep, had a rough night, fever all night, all of that. Woke up the next day, and my recovery score is usually like somewhere between 70 and 85%. So it's solid, it's good, it's usually green. And it was 1%. And you went through and it was like, it showed like all the metrics, and it was like my respiration rate that night went up 2 breaths per minute. My basal body temperature went up 3 degrees. So I had a fever that night. My resting heart rate is normally like 53, and it was 77 that night. So, and then my HRV, which is for me, it's normally around like 60. It was like 23. And what was funny is it literally had it was red. It was at 1% and had a skull and crossbones. And it said like, you need to rest today. Like prioritize rest and relaxation.
You're not going anywhere.
Yeah. You need to hydrate. Like it was basically like chill. And I was like, it knows I'm dying. Like it's kind of how it felt. And so it is kind of cool to see some of that data.
Yeah.
I have enjoyed watching how my strain over the course of the week, which is a combination of my massive workload and my exercise load, how they start to accumulate by Thursday, and then they get kind of a release on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they like peak, and then they like, I have a very nice pattern, and it kind of helps me see that.
Really cool.
The only things I'll note about it are, I think people get really obsessed with HRV. And HRV is a very personalized metric. It's a cadence of a heart rhythm, and it's not something we can massively change. There's a lot of genetic in that. It doesn't mean it can't change. Like if I went from being a sedentary person to a runner, or a power lifter to a runner, or a runner to a power lifter, yeah, there's going to be a change, but it is definitely not as malleable as we think. And so a lot of people are like, is that a good HRV? How do I increase it? How do I change it? And it's like, well, it's almost a distracting metric. It's like, that's not one I'd be too worried about. And on this, it's looking at variance in your HRV. It doesn't really care what your HRV is. It wants to know, is it fluctuating a bunch?
That's a good distinction.
That's important. And so that's where, if you look at, like when I look at my 6 months of HRV data, it's like a very consistent, like 10 millisecond range, which is like a very consistent thing. The only exception was that illness where it dropped like way out of there. And then there was one other exception, and it was a night that I had 2 alcoholic beverages, because as you know, I'm not a big drinker. And so it's not like I even drank that much, but I went from no alcohol for weeks on end to 2 drinks. And my HRV dropped to like 23 from its normal 58 to 65. And then it recovered the next day, but it's to show like, those are the things that if you're someone who drinks consistently, it's going to highlight that. If you're someone that overtrains or is overstressed or is sleep deprived, it's going to highlight that. And so you'll see the volatility, but that's really what we want to measure. It's not all about getting it bigger or better. The other thing I will note is, at least for me, and I will say quite a few of my clients, the calorie tracking is not good. And so it's so far off. You know, I just finished a period where I was bulking, and I was eating 3,200 calories a day consistently, and I was weight maintained for 3 months at that calorie range. And during that time, it told me my average burn was 2387, and I was maintaining at 3,200, which means my average was actually 3,200. So it was over 800 calories off, which is 25% off. And now I'm in a mild cut, so I've been eating 2,700, and 3 weeks in, I've lost 3 pounds. And so it would tell you that my calorie burn is 3,200 minus 5. Like, it's, the math is mathing. This thing's still like 2,350. And you're just like, no, it's not. And I even got to the point where I was like, did I put myself as like a female in here? Like, but it's like, it's me. It's me at my weight as a dude. Like, it's just off. I will say the one experiment I want to run, because I've realized it doesn't reward you, not reward you, that's the wrong word. It doesn't acknowledge, that's a better word, exercise that you're not tracking
like as
unless the heart rate gets to a certain point. And so I have a very low heart rate. Like what it takes for me to get my heart rate above 100 is significantly more than most people because my resting heart rate's in the low 50s and I tend to chill in the 50s all the time. You're probably the same way.
Yeah.
And so this thing won't actually, unless I tell it I'm starting an activity, it won't acknowledge an activity unless my heart rate's over 100 for a sustained period of time. And so, for example, it doesn't give me any strain or activity for my dog walks. Because usually, unless I'm wearing a weighted vest, my heart rate's under 100 the whole time.
Yeah.
But I walk 3 miles a day with Apollo.
That's significant.
That's a notable amount of. So what I need to do is I probably need to just set this to start activity and have the activity as walking from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed and see what my total tracked strain is, even when my heart rate's 80 and 90 and 100. And I'm curious if I did that for a week, I think it would kill the battery every day. So I probably have to charge it every night. The cool part I do like about the Whoop is the charger slides on it. So you don't have to take this off. There's this little capsule that you slide on top and it charges on your wrist too.
Overnight.
So you just charge that thing every day and then slide it.
I'm curious how that works because I'm like, when are you charging it if you're supposed to be wearing it even when you're sleeping? That's cool.
And it slides on. So that is a cool feature that I do like about the Whoop. But so I'll plan to basically have it as a set activity every day for a week. And I'll be curious if it gets closer to that 3,200 because it's just off.
Which is like so important, especially like for people who are athletes that are trying to use this to like estimate their like calorie expenditure and like kind of trying to periodize training and stuff like that around it. Like you could be massively under eating,
way off,
especially if you're like an endurance athlete, like a marathon runner. You probably have a pretty, like, my resting heart rate would probably be waking me up if I had an Apple Watch or something like that.
Yes, exactly. And so it is. There's some factors there. I really love the sleep feature. I do think that sleep is another place though that people get a little obsessed, and it's because now it breaks down light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep essentially. And there are like optimal ranges of those things, but they're just that, they're ranges, and they do differ widely from person to person. And so you'll get people that'll see where their REM and deep sleep are, and it's like, oh my God, I got to get that higher. And if that creates anxiety, it's going to make it worse, not better. So people can get to the point where they're so obsessed about their sleep that it starts to affect their sleep. For me, this was more of just kind of a fun confirmation. I've always been what I felt like a very deep sleeper. Even when I was in my 20s and I was undersleeping in terms of total time, I always woke up very rested. And I know part of it was adrenaline and work, over stimulation, but I always felt like I knocked out really fast. I slept really deep, and then I woke up feeling surprisingly rested. And what's funny is I now sleep very naturally for my body. In my natural sleep, I wake up at about 7 hours and 20 minutes, somewhere between 7:10 and 7:30 without an alarm, like not AM, but total hours of sleep. And what's crazy is you're supposed to get like 75 minutes of deep sleep and REM sleep each. So like 2.5 hours, I average 2 hours of each. And so out of a 7-hour night, I'm 4 hours and 10 minutes of deep sleep, where you're supposed to be like 2 hours and 30 minutes. And even when I sleep like 6 hours, I'm still 4 hours of deep sleep.
Must be nice, Andrew.
So it's funny because that's always been like kind of a hunch that I had of like, I must just be a deep sleeper. And that's what this is confirmed. It's just like, bro, you knock out. And it's like, that's cool. But so I think sometimes people get very obsessed about how to change or manipulate that instead of understanding what that means for them. Like someone's probably that doesn't get as much might need to sleep longer than me. I'm someone that I need 7 hours. There are people that need 8 or even sometimes up to 9. And that's a very personalized thing. And so it goes back to that same thing as the data is interesting, but then you've got to step back and go, okay, what are we learning about ourselves? And then from that, what do we want to do about it? But we can't be trying to micromanage these numbers and like whip them into shape, so to speak.
It sounds like what's like most helpful about it is like it tells you when you need to scale back and when you can push yourself a little bit. But like, what would you say like are your takeaways from this? Like you said, like, what am I going to do about it? Is there anything that you've changed about your habits since starting it?
So I will say it's funny. It's reinforced a lot of things for me. It's reinforced that if I have a meal after 7:30 p.m., because I go to sleep 9:30, 10 very consistently, I don't sleep as well. And my heart rate's higher and all my metrics are off. My sleep score goes down when I eat too late. And so I've been somebody that I used to eat late all the time, started to give me reflux. I started to be like very good about eating by 6, and I tend to do that to date.
Mhm.
But the exceptions, the nights where I've been out with friends or the nights where I come home a little late and I eat a meal, even if it's a really good quality meal, it disrupts my sleep. And so it's something I've already changed, but it's just like shown me that.
Mhm.
For me, I think it definitely has reinforced that I've been in a very good exercise rhythm and very good exercise balance because my strain scores and my recoveries are really good.
Good.
But I think the big takeaway um, that I think was like kind of interesting for me, um, other than the fun sleep data, is I think that it kind of showed me that I just lost my train of thought. Where did it go?
The biggest thing it taught you, other than sleep and other than exercise, recovery.
Yeah, it confirmed with a lot of that. Oh, yeah. It showed me that there's a lot of what I'd call imperceptible strains, which is to say, like, for example, like when I drive back and forth to Raleigh,
Yeah.
right? Like, I really enjoy the drive. I make it super productive. I schedule business meetings. I've got Apollo for dog walks. I just kind of crank and I do it. And I don't perceive that as a drain on me. But I get massive variance in all my metrics the day after like the next morning,
Yeah.
either direction. And so it's shown me like the effects that travel has on me. And even like when I
Totally.
flew to Florida to see some friends and then came back, how my measures changed the first night in the hotel and then the first night back at home. So it's
Yeah.
shown me some of my imperceptible stressors where a way to say it is for most people, you physically tap out before you mentally tap out. And I'm a mentally fairly resilient person. So my mind isn't going to catch certain things. I'm just
Yeah.
going to do it. I'm very much just you just do it. I just slug away and just get after it. That's always how I've been wired. So mentally, I don't even notice. And I'm like, no, it's fine. It's great. But then my body shows me like, hey, this is actually straining me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not invincible. What do you know? So
I like this
that's
for
one of the
you. I
takeaways.
think this is a good thing.
It's been cool data. It
Good.
definitely helps me see things that I might not consciously process. And as a result, it encourages me to take downtime, which is
Yeah.
kind of neat. It's like, oh, I
That's a
better
great
get to bed
takeaway.
earlier. Yep.
I love that. Okay. So we've covered the Whoop Watch, we've covered CGMs. Is there anything else you feel like we should talk about in the world of fitness tech? Or just
I think we could probably brush past the Oura ring just because I think it's almost like a comparison one where a lot of people are like, do I get a Whoop? Do I get an Oura? Obviously, you get like you've got your smart watches that do a lot of this similar stuff. You've got your Garmins that are more of the cardio performance stuff. The Oura ring is less performance and it's more wellness.
that's a good way to put
So
it.
there's a lot of overlapping measures between Whoop and Oura, but it doesn't have like the strain part or the exercise part. It's like more of the basal body temps and the heart rate variability and the sleep scores and some of that kind of stuff.
I will say it's cool, like kind of like in my space, I've been hearing a lot of like my women have been using the Oura ring specifically for tracking their like fertility and their menstrual cycle. So it can be helpful for that. But yeah, I think you put it well. That's like it's more of a wellness tool as opposed to the Whoop Watch is more of like a performance tool, similar to like a lot of the garments and stuff like that. Just elevate it a little bit.
And that's, I think the thing I'd say out loud just as an overarching is kind of like what we said with the scale and with the blood pressure. All these metrics are meant to be data you collect over time. And so when you're looking at like the basal body temperature of a person through a ring, like how accurate is that?
Yeah.
And so it's like we can't like see it for 2 days and then make these deep interventions. We need to look at it over 6 months and go, what's the variance?
Yeah, and also compare it with like real life. Like, hey, does this make sense? Like, are you experiencing a big dip in energy like the same time you're entering your luteal phase, for example? And same thing with like kind of some of the food stuff with the CGM. Like, are you noticing cravings when your blood sugar is dropped? Like, kind of like what is the practical application for real life?
That's well said. So I think that's something that's probably where I'd almost want to like kind of end it is all of these can have a lot of value, but I think sometimes we put too much value and meaning in the direct numbers instead of looking at trends and patterns and then asking like, what am I actually trying to learn from this? And what are my takeaways? They should be takeaways that are positively reinforcing good habits. And so if you don't understand the data, hire a translator. And that's kind of what we do.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. You know where to find us. Is there anything else you wanted to make sure we dug into?
I would just like end by saying that, again, I think it's really important to have a mentor that can kind of like help you understand the context around a lot of this fitness tech if you're going to be spending the money and spending the time and energy on it. And specifically like having someone that is a dietitian that really understands how to use these within the context of your relationship with food, your relationship with your health,
That's well
and your
said.
just relationship with your body in general. Because I think that that's really important to not get caught up in that nitty gritty, to really kind of like help you zoom out and say, like, how does this apply to my actual big long-term goals? What are the metrics that matter, and what are the metrics that I can kind of, ignore to a certain
It's
extent?
well said. So
Yeah.
there it is. Keep calm, data on, hire a translator.
Love it. I
I
love
love
it.
it.
That's it.
Till next time.
Till next time.